Um, I'm so glad that you're here. When I started this idea for a, a book club, I wasn't sure if anyone was going to show up, but at least you're here, so I'm not alone. I mean, it would have been okay if I had to read a book alone. It's pretty much what I do all day, every day anyways, but I'm very excited to share it. So I'm glad that you wanted to join in. Okay, so well, you already know my name, Callidora. What was yours again? Okay. It's very nice to meet you. I'm a little nervous sometimes when meeting people, but I'll be okay. I think you already got something to drink, right? Yeah, the people here are pretty friendly. I'm glad they didn't do anything weird. No, of course there wouldn't be a reason why they would do anything weird. Just, no weirdness is good. In some cases. Anyways, so, do you like fantasy books? Okay, because I already picked out the first book. If that's okay, I figured since I'm the one organizing it, the burden of picking the first book should be on me, so if this goes well and we want to keep going, then you can pick the second one, of course. Okay, so this is a bit of a modern book. I wanted to go with something different. I tend to read older books, but I got this book recommended to me and I really like it. So this book is The Warded Man by Peter V. Brett, and it is a horror fantasy or fantasy horror book. And in some countries it was released as The Painted Man. I'm not sure why. I think The Warded Man works a lot better with the story. It's part of a 5-book series, and the first 4 are out already. I think the last one is gonna come out in August, so I wanted to get something that I knew would be finished, so you don't start reading and then like the author never finishes the books. It's horrible. Then you have to just try and figure out what would happen yourself, and let's see. I'll just reach the back. Okay. I don't really need them, but I'm gonna get my glasses, okay? That's much better. Okay. As darkness falls after sunset, the Corlings rise. Demons who possess supernatural powers and burn with a consuming hatred of humanity. For hundreds of years, the demons have terrorized the night, slowly culling the human herd that shelters behind magical wards, symbols of power whose origins are lost in myth and whose protection is terrifyingly fragile. It was not always this way. Once, men and women battled the core links on equal terms, but those days are gone. Night by night, the demons grow stronger while human numbers dwindle under their relentless assault. Now, with hope for the future fading, 3 young survivors of vicious demon attacks will dare the impossible, stepping beyond the crumbling safety of the world to risk everything in a desperate quest to regain the secrets of the past. Together they will stand against the night. What do you think? It's definitely a bit dark, and there are some scary bits in there, but I already read it earlier, and it's not too bad, but it's definitely a bit spooky. I don't know if you've read the books upon which Game of Thrones was based. A Song of... Yeah. So, it's similar in the way that you have multiple perspectives. In this book, in the first book, there are 3 point of view characters, and in the second book there are like 8, and they both show you the story from different angles, kind of. It's very, very interesting. And the first character that you meet is Arlen, and well, I don't want to spoil anything just yet. Yeah, you want to do this one? Okay. So what I thought is that we could basically read them together at the same pace, and then we can come back, and after every couple chapters we can discuss the book so far and what we think of the characters and the story development and the thematics in the book, and kind of predict where it goes on from there. And I think it would be really fun to kind of discuss something like that. Okay, so well, since you don't have the book yet, I figured for now I can just read you a little bit for the first time. And after that you can get your own copy and we can discuss how far we'll read and stuff like that. Okay. I've got to warn you though, it's one of those books that you don't want to put down. I just tore through it, it's really good. It also has a little map. I was like, when they add stuff like that, you can kind of see where stuff is happening. But that'll make a lot more sense once you kind of, start reading it. Okay. Chapter 1. Aftermath. The great horn sounded. Arlen paused in his work, looking up at the lavender wash of the dawn sky. Mist still clung to the air, bringing with it a damp, acrid taste that was all too familiar. A quiet dread built up in his gut as he waited in the morning stillness, hoping that it had been his imagination. He was 11 years old. There was a pause, and then the horn blew twice in rapid succession. One long and two short meant south and east, the cluster by the woods. His father had friends among the cutters. Behind Arlen, the door to the house opened, and he knew his mother would be there, covering her mouth with both hands. Arlen returned to his work, not needing to be told to hurry. Some chores could wait a day, but the stock still needed to be fed and the cows milked. He left the animals in the barns and opened the hay stores, slopped the pigs, and ran to fetch a wooden milk bucket. His mother was already squatting beneath the first of the cows. He snatched the spare stool, and they found cadence in their work. The sound of milk striking wood, drumming a funeral march. As they moved to the next spare down the line, Arlen saw his father begin hitching their strongest horse, a 5-year-old chestnut-colored mare named Missy, to the cart. His face was grim as they worked. What would they find this time? Before long they were in the cart, trundling toward a small cluster of houses by the woods. It was dangerous there, over an hour's run to the nearest warded structure, but the lumber was needed. Arlen's mother, wrapped in her worn shawl, held him tightly as they rode. "I'm a big boy, Mom," Arlen complained. "I don't need you to hold me like a baby. I'm not scared." It wasn't entirely true, but it would not do for the other children to see him clinging to his mother as they rode in. They made mock of him enough as it was. "I'm scared," his mother said. "What if it's me who needs to be held?" Feeling suddenly proud, Arlen pulled close to his mother again as they traveled down the road. She could never fool him, but she always knew what to say just the same. A pillar of greasy smoke told them more than they wanted to know long before they reached their destination. They were burning the dead, and starting the fires this early, without waiting for others to arrive and pray, meant there were a great many. Too many to pray over each one, if the work was to be complete before dusk. It was more than 5 miles from Arlen's father's farm to the cluster by the woods. By the time they arrived, the few remaining cabin fires had been put out, though in truth there was little left to burn. 15 houses, all reduced to rubble and ash. "The woodpiles, too," Arlen's father said, spitting over the side of the cart. He gestured with his chin toward the blackened ruin that remained of a season's cutting. Arlen grimaced at the thought of how the rickety fence that penned the animals would have to last another year, and immediately felt guilty. It was only wood, after all. The town speaker approached their cart as it pulled in. Celia, whom Arlen's mother sometimes called Celia the Baron, was a hard woman, tall and thin, with skin like tough leather. Her long grey hair was pulled into a tight bun, and she wore her shawl like a badge of office. She brooked no nonsense, as Arlen has learned more than once at the end of her stick, but today he was comforted by her presence. Like Arlen's father, something about Celia made him feel safe. Though she never had children of her own, Celia acted as a parent to everyone in Tibbetts Brook. Few could match her wisdom, and fewer still her stubbornness. When you were on Celia's good side, it felt like the safest place in the world. "It's good that you've come, Jep," Celia told Arlen's father. "Sylvie and young Arlen too," she said, nodding to them. "We need every hand we can get. Even the boy can help." Arlen's father grunted, stepping down from the cart. "I brought my tools," he said. "Just tell me where we can throw in." Arlen collected the precious tools from the back of their cart. Metal was scarce in the brook, and his father was proud of his 2 shovels, his pick, and his saw. They would all see heavy use this day. "How many lost?" Jep asked, though he didn't really seem to want to know. 27, Celia said. Sylvie choked and covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Jep spat again. "Any survivors?" he asked. "A few," Celia said. "Maney," she pointed with her stick at the boy who stood staring at the funeral pyre, "ran all the way to my house in the dark." Sylvie gasped. No one had ever run so far and lived. The watch on Brian Cutter's house held for most of the night, Celia went on. He and his family watched everything. A few others fled to Corlings and suckered there, until the fire spread and their roofs caught. They waited in the burning house until the beams started to crack, and then took their chances outside in the minutes before dawn. The Corlings killed Brian's wife, Mina, and their son, Paul, but the others made it. The burns will heal, and the children will be alright in time, but the others... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Survivors of a demon attack had a way of dying soon after. Not all, or even most, but enough. Some of them took their own lives, and others simply stared blankly, refusing to eat or drink until they wasted away. It was said that she did not truly survive an attack until a year and a day had passed. There are still a dozen unaccounted for, Celia said, but with little hope in her voice. We'll dig them out, Jeff said grimly, looking at the collapsed houses, many still smoldering. The Cutters built their homes mostly out of stone to protect against fires, but even stone would burn if the watch failed and enough flame demons gathered in one place. Jeff joined the other men and a few of the strongest women in clearing the rubble and carting the dead to the pyre. The bodies had to be burned, of course. No one would want to be buried in the same ground the demons rose out of each night. Tender Harl, the sleeves of his robe rolled up to bare his thick arms, lifted each into the fire himself, muttering prayers and drawing words in the air as the flames took them. What do you think so far? Yeah, I agree. It's it's a bit dark, but there's a lot of cool moments, and but it's definitely in the beginning, especially, it's very hopeless. But basically, what these first couple chapters are is kind of the characters, the POV characters being introduced. First you have Arlen, and eventually you'll get introduced to the other characters, and you kind of watch them grow up, kind of. So you get to know them when they're kids, and then eventually when they're an adult. And I think that's really cool because it really shows you why certain characters are a certain way, why they behave the way they do, why they make the choices that they do. I think that's really cool. So if you want, I'll just keep reading. It seems like you're enjoying it, just relaxing. I'm glad you're having a good time. You might have noticed that now that I'm reading, I feel a little bit more comfortable. I like books a lot, and they give me a lot of comfort. I'm glad you feel the same. Okay. I'll read some more. Sylvie joined the other women in gathering the young children and tending to the wounded under the watchful eye of the Brook's herb gatherer, Colleen Trigg. But no herbs could ease the pain of the survivors. Brian Cutter, also called Brian Broadshoulders, was a great bear of a man with a booming laugh who used to throw Arlen into the air when they came to trade for wood. Now Brian sat in the ashes beside his ruined house, slowly knocking his head against the blackened wall. He muttered to himself and clutched his arm tightly, as if cold. Arlen and the other children were put to work carrying water and sorting through the woodpiles for salvageable lumber. There were still a few warm months left to the year, but there would not be time enough to cut wood to last till winter. They would be burning dung again this year, and the house would reek. Again, Arlen weathered a wave of guilt. He was not in the pyre, nor banging his head in shock, having lost everything. There were worse fates than a house smelling of dung. More and more villagers arrived as the morning wore on, bringing their families and whatever provisions they could spare. They came from Fishing Hole and Town Square. They even came from Boggins Hill and Soggy Marsh. Some even came all the way from South Watch. and one by one Celia greeted them with the grim news and put them to work. With more than 100 hands, the men doubled their efforts, half of them continuing to dig as the others descended upon the only salvageable structure left in the cluster, Brian Cutter's house. Celia left Brian away, somehow supporting the giant man as he stumbled, while the men cleared the rubble and began hauling new stones. A few took out warding kits and began to paint fresh wards, while children made thatch. The house would be restored by nightfall. Arlen was partnered with Kobe Fisher in hauling wood. The children had amassed a sizable pile, though it was only a fraction of what had been lost. Kobe was a tall, thickly built boy with dark curls and hairy arms. He was popular among the other children, but it was popularity built at others' expense. Few children cared to weather his insults, and fewer still his beatings. Kobe had tortured Arlen for years, and the other children had gone along. Jeb's farm was the northernmost in the brook, far from where the children tended to gather in town square, and Arlen spent most of his free time wandering the brook by himself. Sacrificing him to Kobe's wrath seemed a fair trade to most children. Whenever Arlen went fishing or passed by a fishing hole on the way to town square, Kobe and his friends seemed to hear about it and were waiting in the same spot on his way home. Sometimes they just called him names or pushed him, but other times he came home bloody and bruised, and his mother shouted at him for fighting. Finally, Arlen had enough. He left a stout stick hidden in that spot, and the next time Kobe and his friends pounced, Arlen pretended to run, only to produce the weapon as if from thin air, and came back swimming. Kobe was the first one struck, a hard blow that left him crying in the dirt with blood running from his ear. Willem received a broken finger, and Gart walked with a limp for over a week. It had done nothing to improve Arlen's popularity among the other children, and Arlen's father had caned him, but the other boys never bothered him again. Even now, Kobe gave him a wide berth and flinched if Arlen made a sudden move, even though he was bigger by far. Survivors, Bill Baker called suddenly, standing by a collapsed house at the edge of the cluster. I can hear them trapped in the root cellar. Immediately, everyone dropped what they were doing and rushed over. Clearing the rubble would take too long, so the men began to dig, bending their backs with silent fervor. Soon after, they broke through the side of the cellar and began hauling out the survivors. They were filthy and terrified, but all were very much alive. 3 women, 6 children, and 1 man. "Uncle Jolie," Arlen cried, and his mother was there in an instant, cradling her brother, who stumbled drunkenly. Arlen ran to him, ducking under his other arm to steady him. "Jolie, what are you doing here?" Sylvie asked. Jolie seldom left his workshop in town square. Arlen's mother had told the tale 1,000 times of how she and her brother had run the farrier's shop together before Jeff began breaking his horse's shoes on purpose for a reason to come court. "Came to court and a cutter," Jolie mumbled. He pulled at his hair, having already torn whole clumps free. We'd just opened a bolt hole when they came through the wards. His knees buckled, pulling Arlen and Sylvie down with his weight. Kneeling in the dirt, he wept. Arlen looked at the other survivors. Anna Cutter wasn't among them. His throat tightened as the children passed. He knew every one of them, their families, what their houses were like inside and out, their animals' names. They met his eyes for a second as they went by, and in that moment he lived the attack through their eyes. He saw himself shoved in a cramped hole in the ground, while those unable to fit turned to face the Corlings and the fire. Suddenly he started gasping, unable to stop, until Jeff slapped him on the back and brought him to his senses. They were finishing a cold midday meal when a horn sounded on the far side of the brook. "Not 2 in a day," Sophie gasped, covering her mouth. "Bah," Celia grunted. "At midday? Use your head, girl." "Then what?" Celia ignored her, rising to fetch a hornblower to signal back. Kevin Marsh had his horn ready, and the folks from Soggy Marsh always did. It was easy to get separated in the marshes, and no one wanted to be wandering lost when the swamp demons rose. Kevin's cheeks inflated like a frog's chin as he blew a series of notes. Messenger Horn, Corin March, advised Sylvie. A greybeard, he was speaker for Shaggy Marsh and Kevin's father. They probably saw the smoke. Kevin's telling him what happened and where everyone is. A messenger in spring? Arlen asked. I thought they come in the fall after harvest. We only finished planting this past moon. Messengers never came last fall, Corin said, spitting foamy brown juice from the root he was chewing through the gap of his missing teeth. We've been worrying something happened. Thought we might have not a messenger bring salt till next fall, or maybe that the Corlings got the free cities and we scud off. The Corlings could never get the free cities, Arlen said. Arlen, shush your mouth, Sylvie hissed. He's your elder. Let the boy speak, Corin said. Ever been to a free city, boy? He asked Arlen. No, Arlen admitted. Ever know anyone who had? No, Arlen said again. So, what makes you such an expert? Corin asked. And no one been to one except the messengers. They're the only ones that brave the night to go so far. Who's to say the free cities and just places like the brook? If the Corlings can get us, they can get them too. Old Hogg is from the free cities, Arlen said. Roscoe Hogg was the richest man in the brook. He ran the general store, which was the crux of all commerce in Tibbetts Brook. Aye, Corin said. And old Hogg told me years ago that one trip was enough for him. He meant to go back after a few years, but said it wasn't worth the risk. So you ask him if the free cities are any safer than anywhere else. Arlen didn't want to believe it. There had to be safe places in the world. But again, the image of himself being thrown into the cellar flashed across his mind, and he knew that nowhere was truly safe at night. The messenger arrived an hour later. He was a tall man in his early 30s, with cropped brown hair and a short, thick beard. Draped about his broad shoulders was his shirt of metal links, and he wore a long dark cloak with thick leather breeches and boots. His mare was a sleek brown courser. Strapped to the horse's saddle was a harness holding a number of different spears. His face was grim as he approached, but his shoulders were high and proud. He scanned the crowd and spotted the speaker easily as she stood giving orders. He turned his horse toward her. Riding a few paces behind on a heavily laden cart pulled by a pair of dark brown mollies was the young lure. His clothes were brightly colored patchwork, and he had a lute resting on the bench next to him. His hair was a color Arlen had never seen before, like a pale carrot, and his skin was so fair it seemed the sun had never touched it. His shoulders slumped, and he looked thoroughly exhausted. There was always a young lure with the annual messenger. To the children and some of the adults, the young lure was the more important of the two. For as long as Arlen could remember, it had been the same man, grey-haired but spry and full of cheer. The new one was younger and seemed sullen. Children ran up to him immediately, and the young lure perked up, the frustration melting from his face so quickly Arlen began to doubt it was ever even there. In an instant the young lure was off the cart, and spinning his colored balls in the air as the children cheered. It'll be quite a bit if I have to finish the whole chapter, but if you want, you can borrow this copy of mine. I read up until page 10, so you can just keep reading from there. Why don't you just let me know how much you've read? I can go with your pace. I'm a pretty fast reader, so it doesn't matter too much to me. And then we'll schedule a new appointment. Oh, that sounds really official. I'll just schedule another date to hang out and talk about the book. Yeah, it's getting a little busier around here around this time of night. People here, they're tend to be a little nocturnal. So, well, you take this, and, yeah, I'll show you out. Okay. I had a good time, though. I like sharing book stuff, and, I'm very excited